more on this, as well as the rest of his portfolio, I'm joined by the Resources Minister, Josh Frydenberg, who is in our Perth studio. Minister, thanks for your time today. I know it's early over there. Queensland Nickel, the victim of resources prices, according to Clive Palmer, as well as a few other accusations as well. Would you agree that that's been the main reason for the downfall?
Well, clearly there's some very bad management decisions made at Queensland Nickel, and it's a bit rich now for Clive Palmer to play the victim, given that hundreds of workers have lost their job at Queensland Nickel. Clive Palmer is accountable not just to those workers but to the people of Fairfax, and it's quite clear that his election was a very bad experiment for the people of Fairfax.
The other jobs on everyone's radar at the moment, Arrium and the steelworks there in Whyalla in particular. You'll be heading with the Prime Minister to China later on this week. Are the reports accurate that neither you nor the Prime Minister will be pushing or seeking a please explain perhaps from China for the cheap steel that's flooding the market from China?
Well, no doubt this issue will come up in discussions over there in China, but I want to make a couple of points. Firstly, we as a government have strengthened the anti-dumping provisions, and we will not accept the dumping of steel in Australia or indeed of other commodities. The other point is that Bill Shorten, in another example of his populist politics in the lead up to an election, said that Australia should go down the path of mandating the use of Australian steel for projects. Now, to do that would be disastrous both to the taxpayer, because it would drive up the cost, because it would remove the competitive tension from the tender process, basically giving a monopoly provider free access to these contracts. But also it would risk retaliatory action from our other free trade partners, and we are a trading nation. For example, with China, we have $150 billion worth of two-way trade, and $100 billion of that trade is in our favour. We export to them. So I think that Bill Shorten has put in danger the future prospects of our farmers, of our service providers, and for others who are trading with our key partners by his irresponsible actions.
Okay, we'll get to the trade agreement in a moment, but just on the point of steel, for example, anti-dumping isn't always necessarily easy to prove. The US have reacted by actually putting tariffs on Chinese steel. Is this something Australia can consider given our agreement? I suppose that would be a difficulty there, but how do you prove the anti-dumping when you've got reports that Chinese steelmakers have been making a loss since May on all the tonnage they've been producing?
Well, we've actually asked the Anti-Dumping Commissioner to come back to the government with further ideas as to how we can strengthen our regime, but we've already taken measures. So our position is very clear. We won't tolerate the dumping of steel in Australia, and we'll seek to support domestic industries. And again, Bill Shorten has a lot to answer for here, because not that long ago he supported a carbon tax and wants to bring one back in again. And the ones who lose out of a carbon tax are not only just households and normal businesses, but the energy intensive businesses like the steel industry. So, you know, he gives with one hand and he takes with the other.
When it comes to free trade and the deal with China, we've got reports today in the Financial Review that new laws about China's tax bureau have excluded some Australian products when it comes to being imported from free trade zones and airports as well. They've excluded such things as Murray Goulburn, a big dairy company. Blackmores apparently is in some limbo as to what it's going to mean for them, and they had their share price drop by 13% on the day that this was all announced. Are you going to be making any inquiries, or will the government be making inquiries about this? This appears to exclude specific things that Australia thought was going to be opening up when it came to trade.
Look, these issues will be dealt with by our very effective Trade Minister, Steve Ciobo, who's leading more than 1,000 Australian businesses over there in China for Australia Week. So these are the sorts of issues that he nuts out with his counterparts. But it has to be said, we are great beneficiaries of our free trade with China, and under the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, Tom, 96% of all goods that we export to China will be tariff-free over the life of the agreement. That's great news for our exporters, and issues like this can be easily resolved between the counterparties.
But how easily resolved? You mentioned getting rid of tariffs, and this is something Andrew Robb was very proud to say when it came to dairy. Now we've got these new laws from the Tax Bureau. They've spoken quite blatantly about these being about protecting Chinese companies. This doesn't seem like a small issue, does it? This has just come out. Surely you'd be expressing some concern about this sort of protectionism with a country we've just done a huge trade deal with.
Well, like I said, we are supporting free trade, and where there are these bilateral irritants, we'll resolve them between the two parties, and Steve Ciobo will no doubt be pursuing that, and if they're in my area, I'll be pursuing that as well. But quite clearly, the free trade agreement with China is strongly in our interest. We're a country of 24 million people. China is a country of 1.3 billion people, and it's already gone through an amazing industrial transformation, and we have been a great beneficiary of it, not just in our resources sector, but also in our agriculture sector and also in our services sector. And 70% of our economy is services, be it health, be it education, be it tourism, be it financial services, and there are huge opportunities for exporting our products and services into China in the years ahead. So I'm very optimistic about the strength of that bilateral relationship and our ability to have a very smooth free trade relationship.
So you say you'll be pursuing it. What will that mean exactly? Presumably the Tax Bureau in China knew what it was doing when it made this edict. Does pursuing it mean pressuring them, threatening any sort of legal action? What does pursuing it mean?
Well, our job is to act on behalf of the Australian companies. That's whose interests we'll defend, that's whose interests we'll promote, and that's why we have worked very hard, particularly Andrew Robb, to strike these free trade agreements, not just with China, but also Japan and Korea and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So whether it's between our officials or whether it's between ministers, if there are problems in the relationship or in particular sectors, they do get raised, and hopefully we get good outcomes.
So when it comes to this trade barrier, steel as well, you said it would come up in talks. Are you telling the Australian people and people in this industry in particular, you're willing to talk tough with China and push back?
We've always been prepared to talk tough on behalf of Australian industry, and like I said, our measures that we've taken, Tom, on the anti-dumping provisions have been very important. We've acted where the Labor Party refused to. We got rid of the carbon tax, which punished that industry, which the Labor Party obviously promoted. We are now supporting our free trade agreements, and in this important visit by the Prime Minister, myself, Steve Ciobo and other ministers will continue to raise issues that are important to our country.
Okay, on to another area if I can, negative gearing. A report today in The Australian about this BIS shrapnel report earlier in the year on Labor's policy, or not the exact policy but parts of it. Are you still trying to hammer Labor over this report, considering it apparently was showed only in draft form to Labor July, well before they developed their own, and is not the same policy as theirs is, despite the dire warnings?
Well, this is a major revelation. You've got Chris Bowen saying that he doesn't know who commissioned these reports, and now he's saying even this morning that he wasn't briefed on it, but it's turned out that his office was briefed on it. I mean, seriously, this is, you know, the dog ate my homework excuse. He should know better as the Shadow Treasurer in Australia. And this is an example of what happens when you make policy on the run, when you've got a tax policy which is supposed to be housing affordability, which whacks up the capital gains tax and will drive out the level of entrepreneurship and innovation and investment we want in this country. When you have a negative gearing policy which will drive down housing values and increase rents, and as this report was showing, will be bad for the economy and bad for the budget.
When it comes to the report, though, it was actually commissioned, we find out today, by the accountancy firm that had similar modelling done and was also opposed to Labor making the changes they had in the mid-80s. They appear to have some sort of vested interest, or certainly issue with any changes to negative gearing. And the final page on the report points out that in 85, 87, the negative gearing impacts weren't that significant, bar Sydney and Perth, where you had separate shortages essentially when it came to housing.
But Chris Bowen's office was briefed upon it, and now he's saying he never knew about it. I mean, seriously, will people take that as an excuse? Come on, Tom. This again shows Labor's reckless policy on the run approach. This policy on negative gearing will drive down housing prices and increase rents. And we've seen from this report, it will hurt the budget and will hurt the economy. And under this guise of a housing affordability scheme and a housing affordability policy, they're driving up the capital gains tax. Now, the Australian people will hear a lot more about this in the lead up to the election, but I don't think they want to see the value of their houses go down.
Well, I'm sure they certainly will hear a lot more about it in the lead up to that election. Josh Frydenberg, thanks for your time today on Sky News.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Tom.
Stay with us on AIM Agenda. We'll be back with